Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Ellen Riley.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next session. We have got a fantastic panel for you. We've got about an hour and 15 minutes, and we're discussing geopolitics and energy. Is Europe on the right track? And we've got a lot to get through, some fine panelists, and we have a number of points I think we have to start with, the technical IT points that you can get. We have a huge online audience via the TATRA Summit website, and this is being live streamed. And we're encouraging questions through the TATRA Summit app and tweets using the hashtag GTS16. So don't forget that, GTS16. Now, we encourage a lot of questions from the audience and then from the broader online community, and hopefully we'll have a summary of the online media activity a little later in the program. So, geopolitics and energy, the right track, lots of recent debates, developments. We've got the prospect of a Gazprom antitrust settlement. We've got the prospect of developments over the Opal pipeline. We've got Nord Stream 2. And we've got the broader questions of supply security in Europe. Not just gas, but in oil, nuclear. Where is Europe going with its supply security? And we've got a fantastic panel for you. We've got the Norwegian Minister of the Crown in Tord André Lien, who's the Petroleum and Energy Minister. We've got the Commission Vice President, Markus Sefcovic. We've got Mr. Joseph Molnar, the Group CEO of MOL. And we've got the irrepressible energy expert, John Roberts. So we've got a really great panel. So what we're going to try and do is, I'm going to really, on the whole, leave it to the panelists to give their view of where Europe's energy security is on the right track. Although I'm afraid I may have a few questions for Mr. Sefcovic. And I want to give the panelists a bit of time to talk, 5 or 10 minutes each, and then we're going to switch over to a little quickfire Q&A across the audience. And we want to try and keep this as interactive as possible. I'm not going to try and dominate the session at all. I want a lot of people to be engaged. And the other element I want in this is for you to be engaged. I want this to be as interactive as possible, both with the audience here and with the online audience. So what I might do first of all is perhaps move to Mr. Lien, and perhaps he'd like to give a Norwegian view of whether Europe is on the right track in terms of its supply security as one of our major suppliers of gas to the Union.
Well, yeah. Always more than happy to talk about Norway's role as a long-term stable supplier of gas to Europe. But I think if you observe the question you are asking, and is Europe well prepared and well supplied with energy, I think the answer is that huge parts of Europe meets a very efficient energy market for power and for gas. The region where Norway is in the northwestern Europe, we do see, for instance, in the Nordic countries, a very highly integrated power market between all the Nordic countries. There is no debate in the Nordic populations on dependence and independence. We all know that the reason why there is electricity more or less always present is the fact that we are interdependent in the Nordic countries. Our power resources is very effectively utilized because we have a very effective market, very open and liberal market, and a very strong transmission and grid capacity infrastructure for power. And I think really that is the direction the Commission is pointing towards also for the European Union and their member states in the work on the energy union. And of course, sometimes when the will to create new politics becomes too great, you see that you not only allow the market to play, which I think is the good answer to how to develop power systems, but there are too much regulations. And I think trust open, effective markets and creates trust as history develops. So I think it's one of the things that I'm a little bit worried about nowadays when the Commission and Parliament is working with the development of the energy union is the fact that I think it's going to be important to allow the market to actually play. And when it comes to the gas infrastructure in Europe, which in some parts of Europe is really robust and really creates a foundation for a very effective market. There has been done a lot of important things. Reverse flow capacity, increased storage capacity has been important. But of course, the huge, okay, we are used to competition. Norway has been competing for European Union gas customers for decades. From EU domestic production, from Russian production, and from production from the Arabic states. But what we see now is a huge increase in the LNG production globally. North America is very much on top of everybody's mind nowadays, but also the volumes being produced in Asia Pacific represents a huge opportunity for Europe. Europe already has the capacity to regasify huge volumes of gas. Approximately 2/3 of EU 28 gas consumption annually can be regasified. However, not all European Union member states has access to LNG capacity, either through owning and operating an own LNG regasifier or by pipeline to this kind of infrastructure. And of course, a lot of this LNG capacity, regasification capacity, is in the Iberian Peninsula. But of course, the gas from the Iberian Peninsula can't reach markets in southeastern Europe. So a lot of good things has been done on strengthening the capacity for transmission of gas in Europe. Really important for strengthening the security of supply, but more work has to be done also in the years ahead. And of course, a market needs rule of law, needs infrastructure, but of course a market also needs diversity of supply. And I think also, and I'm very happy that that also was the conclusion from the Commissioner, also needs diversity of demand. And I know Maros knows what I'm talking about.
Well, thank you very much. I think that takes us neatly to the Commissioner. And I think one of the questions I think we have to ask is obviously yesterday, PGNiG, the Polish energy company, indicated that it was prepared to bring proceedings against the Commission and indeed the German regulator over the potential OPAL decision. And a question I really have there is this going to cause the Commission some trouble? I mean, one of the questions that a lot of the energy law experts always questioned was why OPAL had an exemption in the first place. If you look at Article 36 and its predecessor, Article 22, in the Directive 2003, both the exemption provisions were pretty clear that you had to enhance competition, add to supply, and enhance supply security. And the question of how a diversionary pipeline, taking gas diversionary from Ukraine into Nord Stream 1 and then into Germany, increasing the market power of Gazprom in the region, was in any way supposed to comply with Article 36. And the other question, I think, is Article 11. Why was there no Gazprom certification under Article 11? And the argument there, as I understand it, is this, that whilst the German government says, the regulator says, well, the Gazprom only has 40% of OPAL, the test is decisive influence, which is taken from EU merger law, which is a realist test on the real situation in relation to the pipeline. And if you take the fact that Wintershall depends upon Gazprom for upstream access to upstream markets, and that owns the other 40%, and that Gazprom provides the supply, the argument is that under EU law, one would normally take the view that decisive influence is what Gazprom has over OPAL as a result, and therefore there should be Article 11 certification. So is the Commission in trouble here? Will Poland win in the EU courts? Over to you, Mr. Sekovic.
Thank you very much. Before getting to your question, I just really would like to thank to all the colleagues on the podium that I'm very glad that they came. And I would say that we look at the air conditioning in the room as a special welcome to Thor, because we want him to feel like at home, that, you know, he's used to harsh Arctic conditions. We've been flying together to Sleipner, so I know what does it mean. And if you allow me, I will not avoid the question, I will answer to it, but I wouldn't like just to kind of narrow down all the discussion about energy security of Europe into one pipeline of 32 BCM, because I think what we need to really have a look at is what has been done over the last 20 months, since which we started with the Energy Union project and where we announced what we are going to do. And of course, you have a lot of legal issues in there, and you have a lot of politics and a lot of efforts to diversify. If you look at the legal issues, we put on the table security of supply package, where we are making sure that in the future we would avoid the crises as we have in 2006 and 2009 by simply making sure that the countries will be working together, they will develop these regional emergency strategies. That we would accommodate better the LNG, that we would work on interconnection among our member states, and that we would have much more transparency if it comes to intergovernmental agreements. And I have high hopes that my compatriots who are now running the presidency will manage to complete the work on this file before the end of the year. Then, of course, we have to look what happened this year. I think we managed quite successfully to marry the energy and climate policy and present very clearly that for us energy efficiency is also the source of energy, actually the cleanest one and the cheapest one. And therefore, what we are currently working on is the jumbo package, which I hope will be presented late November, early December, where we are going to completely reform the way how we trade and how we produce and consume the energy in Europe. We are going to redesign the electricity market. We are going to bring new elements into the renewables directives, into the energy efficiency directive. We are going to make sure that ACER, the Agency for the Cooperation of European Regulators, would be better equipped to deal with these cross-border responsibilities, which are becoming so important. And I believe that this would really create the new situation on the ground. Talking about the pipelines and the interconnections and interconnectors. Here again, I think we really achieved a lot. I mean, if you look at our GLOBSEC initiative, where the countries which always been a little bit cautious to cooperate with each other are now one of the most dynamic groups we have in the EU if it comes to the energy cooperation. We have priority list of the projects. We have new trust among the ministers, and it was their initiative to push this level of cooperation also into electricity and into renewables. And it's a little bit how this part of Europe is learning from Nordic-Baltic cooperation and from the positive results which have been there. The last Saturday I was in Rzeszów. The Visegrad 4 presidents invited me to debrief them, to inform them where we are, what's happening in the energy security field. And again, strong focus was on North-South cooperation. We discussed with Thor just a few minutes ago how he sees that new prospect of this Norwegian, Danish, Polish pipeline, and how, of course, this could become the part of North-South corridor and towards very pertinent suggestion that it should definitely be also part of this Nordic-Baltic interconnected gas market. So here a lot of things is happening, and why I'm mentioning all that, because all this is creating much better liquidity on the market for the gas coming from different directions. Norway is a very trusted partner, and I'm sure that they will play even more important role in the future. Southern Gas Corridor will bring Caspian gas to Europe by 2020. We really have a strong interest from LNG, be it overseas from United States, or be it the new possibilities we have in the EastMed, and I can continue. So therefore, I think that we have to look at the energy security in this whole context, and also we always have to bear in mind how much gas do we actually need in Europe. And I think we have pretty good estimates and assessment how much gas do we need. And I think it's quite important to assess these figures from the point of view, how much infrastructure do we need? Because currently, going into the Russian direction now, we are using that infrastructure only at the 50% level. And therefore, our argument, which I believe will be actually reinforced by this Opal decision, is that we really don't need anything much more, because we would be risking then in the future that we will have the pipelines which could become stranded assets. And that's, I think, also one of the reasons why we have these different news, different discussions, and different elaborations on the necessity on the new infrastructure which is currently going on. And getting to Opal. Of course, we all have to remember what was the situation when Nord Stream 1 was built. It was project of a common interest at that time. It was project of a common interest at that time. Because we had our experience from 2006 and 2009, and we've been actually very happy to get that pipeline at that time as a Europeans. And it was just in between the second energy package and third energy package which was adopted. And then, of course, you know all these legal elements as I listened to you extremely well. So then the decision was taken that there will be 100% exemption, and that actually Gazprom can use 100% of this pipeline, not like it is written in our papers, only 50%. They could use 100% of the pipeline if they would be ready to offer for gas release 3 BCM per year. They didn't do it. We can speculate why, but they didn't do it, and in that case, the second condition applied, and this was that only 50% of the pipeline could be used. Now we are in a situation where the German regulator, in accordance with the European law, asked us to change this exemption regime. They came with a proposal which would keep 50% of this pipeline for Gazprom, and that 50% should be regulated with a proposal of 4 plus 4%. And for us, this was not good enough. And of course, we've been looking what are our legal options in the Commission. We could not react, not act. What would happen in that case? The regime which the German regulator proposed would be automatically deemed adopted. We could refuse, but on very shaky legal grounds, which we are pretty sure would be challenged successfully in the court. Or we could propose better solution. And this is exactly what we did. And we proposed the solution which is now opening for the first time this pipeline to the third parties up to 20%. So for the first time, 20% of the pipeline would be open for the third parties. And just to describe what does it mean, it means that if it comes to the Czech Republic, 60% of Czech consumption could be now supplied by the third parties in the pipeline, which is for the first time. So we believe that under the circumstances, we adopted the best possible solution. And I have to add, there are arguments which I have seen in the press that this is directly to the detriment of Ukrainian gas transit route, to the Polish Yamal transit route. And we do not have the same conclusions. Why? First, Both of these transit routes are for the European Union and for the European Commission top political priorities. Preservation of gas, transit route through Ukraine, also in a post-2019 period, is a top political priority. We have a unanimous decision on this from all EU member states, and I know that also our German friends are very much pushing for that to happen. So that's, I would say, very clear political reaction to this. Secondly, we studied as much as we could the situation on the market and the contracts. In these contracts, you have clear volumes, you have clear delivery points, which cannot be changed from one day into another. So I would say that before, I would say, this harsh criticism, it would be better to wait until this decision is finalized. It will be finalized today because it's extremely legalistic document which has 42 pages. It's better to read it because it's very, very technical. And what I believe you will see that we've been very much sticking to our principles of respecting the EU law, of respecting the principles, opening the markets and opening this pipeline. And I believe that we will be also able to deliver on our other promises to make sure that Ukraine will remain the principal transit route in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Perhaps we can move on from that pipeline to the other pipelines and turn to John now to look at the Southern Corridor and Turkish Stream.
Well, my thanks to the organisers of the TATRA Summit for inviting me. I'm going to try to talk about one part of set of subjects that might be considered conventional, and then to introduce a somewhat unconventional approach. Conventionally, what do we have? We have a project underway, Southern Gas Corridor, roughly at current prices, $38 billion worth of project, that had the decisions not been taken in December 2013, quite possibly would not be taken today because of the changing price environment. This has major implications. There is no question but that the Southern Gas Corridor will be built, and it will be built to the original specifications, more or less. No significant change. But there is a big problem. While the first element of filling that pipeline is assured, namely 10 BCM to come to Europe from the Shah Deniz gas field and another 6 BCM to go to Turkey, this is a system intended to carry twice that amount. And we do not know anymore where that other 16 or so BCM will come from. There's a quantum change. If you've been talking about this in 2013, when there was a general assumption there will be a next wave of Azerbaijani gas production. We will see companies like Total develop the offshore Absheron field. We will see companies like BP perhaps moving to develop a layer of deep-level gas under the Azeri-Cheragudeshli oil field. Those projects may yet come about, but I would be very surprised indeed if they start yielding any significant results before the late 2020s. The investment climate simply does not justify rapid development. So we have a pipeline system that is not quite half empty because the extra compression hasn't been put in place, but potentially half empty. But I think we're going to see who's going to fill that. Gazprom is pressing ahead with constructing its Turkish Stream system. 2 lines across the Black Sea. One will basically serve to replace gas coming through Ukraine, Moldova, Bulgaria, and Romania to Turkey. The other Well, a little bit will go locally in the Balkans, a bit more for extra supply to Turkey, perhaps. But the size is too big to go for those markets alone. They're going to be left with very, very roughly 10 or 12 BCM over. And where is that line going to end? It's not going to end just simply on the coast of Turkey. It's going to end on the point at the Greek border with Turkey, where the two parts of the southern gas corridor meet, the TANAP and TAP pipelines. I would expect that a couple of years down the road, Gazprom will seek to use the TAP line, the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, across Greece, across Albania to Italy, to carry its gas to Europe, using the fact that the second half of TAP is open access, and therefore, if they put in a bid for an open season, they can't be turned down, and they are likely to be the only prospective supplier. But you've still got something like 1,800 kilometers of pipeline across Turkey that would then be only half filled, because any gas going into it would not be able to get any further, because Russian gas would have taken it up. Well, I think we may be seeing something happening there as well. If you talk, as I've been doing recently, to Iranian officials, their priorities are very simple with gas. Number one priority, overwhelmingly, use it to bolster oil production and to substitute for oil on the domestic market. Number two, serve regional markets. If you'd asked them a year ago, did this really include Turkey? No. And indeed, there are some Iranian officials who say, well, maybe we'll serve Turkey, but by LNG somewhere down the line. But there is an element now in the National Iranian Gas Company that is very seriously looking at putting gas into the Turkish market by means of TANAP. And it should be said that the economics of TANAP in and of itself are not terribly good. They would welcome gas from whatever source they can get to improve the commerciality of operating the line. So I think you're going to see Russia and Iran play a much greater role than Azerbaijan in the next stage of filling the southern gas corridor. And this, of course, goes back to a concept, in a sense, developed in happier times in the early 2000s when the EU was looking for a whole arc of suppliers to enter, but which got compressed to one supplier, Azerbaijan, in recent years. Now, I said that I would talk about something conventional, and that was conventional. But I'm a little worried about something else. Is there actually a future for gas in Europe? Are we actually barking up the wrong tree completely? If you look at gas supply, we've got plenty of it coming in. The Russians are at record levels of supply to Europe already, competing on price. That is the one thing that is most striking and gives hope for there to be a growing gas market in future. But that's a hope. What's actually happening out there? Incremental electricity production in Europe. Where is it coming from? In 2016, it is entirely coming from a combination of nuclear, hydro, solar, and wind. And next year, 2017, the incremental increase is likely to come entirely from solar and wind alone. Now, these are actually tiny amounts. Last year's increase was only 127 gigawatts. By comparison with 13,000 in installed capacity. It's massive. It's tiny, but it's that amount that tips the market, that prevents there being new investment in gas. So I am not at all sure what the future for gas is, because we forget something. Consumers are not institutions. They act according to a variety of impulses, and by and large in Europe, we have consumers who simply argue or behave as if gas was simply another fossil fuel and by definition bad. Even though there is a very strong argument that I support wholeheartedly that says greater use of gas is the quickest way to bring carbon emissions down. So we have a paradox. I think we may actually skip what the IEA once called a golden age of gas, and move to a very nasty medium-term German model of energy development. Large-scale spending and subsidies of renewables with coal as a backup and increasing carbon pollution in at least the short term.
Well,
I hope that's not true, but I have a horrible fear it might be.
Thank you for that very gloomy view on the future of natural gas. And I hope the concept of the whole of Europe going down the German strategy of wind, coal as an energy solution is avoided. Now, let us turn to Mr. Molnar, the group CEO of MOL. MOL is the largest private company in the region. It has done an enormous amount of practical work on energy security, putting in interconnectors and other facilities to ensure the supply security of the entire region. And perhaps you would like to give some observations on your experience of that more practical approach to supply security.
First of all, I would like to apologize on behalf of Mr. Hernadi. He is ill, and I will do the best of my effort to replace him. MOL is one of the biggest energy company in the region, owning the Hungarian gas TSO, gas producer, and gas consumer at the same time. Whatever happens in the market or doesn't happen, it will influence our business. In the last 10 years, after we were shocked by the first crisis in 2006, gas crisis, I mean, we have developed the infrastructure. We built gas strategic storage capacity in addition to the commercial storage capacities. We have built 2 interconnectors towards Romania and Croatia, and not MOL, but another Hungarian company built interconnector between Hungary and Slovakia. These days, we have much better infrastructure than in 2006. With the exception of Slovenia, the Hungarian gas network has direct connection to the neighboring countries. But despite this fact, we cannot tell we have integrated gas market in the region. Why? Infrastructure is one thing. Part of the infrastructure is not completed these days. Towards Croatia, there is no reverse flow. The LNG is missing from the other end of the pipeline network. And if we have infrastructure, there are some other barriers, economic or financial tariffs, local regulation, which, prevent the integrated market. In the future, it would be welcomed by the business community if we had a real integrated market. Based on our experience, in which we were the part of the big Nabucco project. And based on the interconnectors, we prefer to use the existing network because the existing network has enough surplus capacity. The Hungarian network could deliver 14 billion cubic meters in 2006-7, before the financial crisis in 2008. These days, the Hungarian consumption is less than 9 billion cubic meters. The network has much bigger capacity. It's much more cost efficient if we use the existing network, if it is possible, of course, instead of building big, very capex intensive on-purpose pipelines. And we should not forget the other type of the energy, like oil. We made a huge investment into the oil pipeline. And these days, how both the Hungarian and Slovakian refineries is able to get crude oil, 100% of their demand, either from Russia, either from the Adriatic Sea. We think if the committed work will be completed in Central Eastern Europe, we will have an infrastructure. If we could solve the problem of the regulation tariffs, we will have a good chance to have an integrated market. But according to our opinion, the electricity will be a bigger challenge in the next 5 years than the gas itself in Central Eastern Europe. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That's excellent. Thank you. Now, I'd like to actually move rapidly to the audience. I'm looking for questions, and I see a question over here from a distinguished gentleman. Perhaps you could get a microphone to him.
Sure. Thanks, Alan. My name's Matt Bryza. I'm also at the Atlantic Council with John, and was struck by, John, your comment about the... I live in Turkey, by the way, and spent years and years working on the Southern Corridor and before that. So 1998, 1999, some of us in the U.S. government were worried when the Blue Stream pipeline popped up, as what appeared to be a clear attempt by Gazprom and Russia to block the emerging East-West corridor, and it worked. It spooked away the Turkmenistanis. They had problems with Azerbaijan as well. We never got the Trans-Caspian link. But what John's talking about today, the bringing together Turkish Stream at the very node where TANAP and TAP come together, strikes me as something that should really alarm us. But I just wonder, especially for you, Mr. Vice President, how much alarm is this causing? How much does it just seem like an economically motivated project that may or may not make sense? Or is that a debate that still needs to happen? Thank you.
No, I think it's of course, very, very good, very legitimate question. Concerning the southern gas corridor, I still believe that it's a very important project because this corridor is becoming, and for sure will become, a strategic asset which will be very important for Europe. We'll see what will be the future. I think the analysis of the professor was quite intriguing, but also he's already highlighting how this pipeline can be used and even branch out. So it's a strategic asset in the region which is very rich with the hydrocarbons, and which clearly would become as a very important diversification line for Europe. So that's, I think, very important to say, and we are following, of course, this development very, very closely, and I think that once this pipeline is used, one is put in operation and it's done on time, we'll see again how this, I would say, local energy geopolitics will change, because it's something else when you see the pipeline on the map, and it's something else when you see how is it used and what kind of new opportunities are being built. Then, of course, if it comes to the streams discussion, here I'm very careful because we have Turkish Stream on, off, on, one pipeline, two pipelines, we have South Stream, we have North Stream, we have all these things. So I think it's, of course, very important to look at it, to try to understand the thinking behind, the logic behind all these proposals. And what I think is happening, and what also the professor mentioned, is that we see increased competition, not only on the global markets, but especially in the European market in the supplying of the gas. And I think, to be quite honest, that's good for Europe. Because very often we've been in a situation where not the price developments, but long-term contracts, different kind of deals with a bit of a political coloring, different kind of influence, been negotiating, and we are slowly overcoming that situation. And I hope that this will definitely help us to also overcome the fact, which is investigated by my colleague Margaret Vestager, that what are the reasons that the Central and Eastern Europe actually was paying between 16 to 20% more for gas over the recent years. Of course, one reason was that we are not that liquid, not that well interconnected, and this is what we are trying, of course, to fix and make sure that we have much more better responsive systems as we had before. And I think also Mr. Molnar just described that how quickly we are actually building up that infrastructure. And second reason was that we had the contracts where there was a dominant position of the dominant supplier, Gazprom, very well reflected. And this is what we are correcting right now. But coming back to your original question, I think what's happening, I would say, in all major companies, including Gazprom, they are realizing what's happening in the world with Paris Agreement, what's happening in Europe, with Energy Union, with all the, I would say, energy efficiency and renewables drive. And what we see is now such increased competition, increased fight for the market share of very lucrative European market. I think what we see is that all that development plans, if it comes to the Far East, China, and so on and so forth, they, under the current price situation, I mean, I think it will take much longer. And of course, you have to put a lot of new figures into the business equation when you are building this project. And Europe, despite all our efforts in energy efficiency and renewables, remains an extremely important client, which pays on time, where the infrastructure is very developed. And I'm differing a little bit in analysis with the professor on the future of gas. We see it in the European Commission as very important transitional fuel. I believe that the gas is very good match for increased proportion of renewables in our mix. We see that some countries are already excluding coal from the energy mix, and I presume there will be more and more countries which would go in that direction. We expect that the gas would be used more in transport, in maritime shipping, and in different new technologies. So our assessment is, and I think here we are quite close to the International Energy Agency, that we would use more or less the same volume of gas in 2030 as we are using today, between 380 to 440, 450 BCM. So that's the figures with which we are working. And coming back to your original question, I think what is very important for us, and of course here we need the full cooperation of our member states, to make sure that whatever would be the developments, that we would not end up in the situation where we can limit the competition, where we can, let's say, wall off the potential supplies, be it from LNG, be it from EastMed, be it from somewhere else, by some kind of, I would say, commercial or other policy, because we must make sure that we are open market, that we would have a competition in Europe. And that's, of course, what we are seeing very closely with every proposal which is mentioned. When I was discussing the latest development in this front in Istanbul, when there was this World Energy Congress, and I also had a discussion with the Minister El Bayrak. So I think they, as they see it, is quite clear that they want to have the supply of that one pipe for Turkey. And the second, they say, let's see if there is a demand in Europe. Let's see that, and what would be, of course, the legal regime? What would be the overall, what would be the overall conditionality for such a project. So it's very difficult to say it right now, but if you allow me one more minute, and I promise I will stop at that time. I think it's I'm making a lot of advertisement to the study which was published, I think 2-3 weeks ago by the European Environmental Agency, because they did very thorough check of 11,000 power stations in Europe. All power stations over 200 megawatts, and what needs to be done in the field of investment, retrofitting, refurbishing of these power stations between now and 2030. And what would happen if we do it in a traditional way, and what would happen if we would look for the modern combination, combine heat power with the renewables and so on and so forth. So that first way would lead to the stranded assets, overcapacity of 25%. And the second way would lead to the savings of 100 billion euros. So I think it would be up for every government to have a look. I asked them to make sure that we will have the quite precise analysis for every single member state, so we can have very thorough discussions about it also on the national level. And I believe that in the current circumstances, the discussion of the capacities, overcapacities, return on investment will bring, I would say, a lot of the commercial logic into the business, which was very often in the past driven by pure geopolitics. And that, I think, would be much better for Europe, I would say, for economic development, and that would really transform gas into the global commodity, where, of course, we have concern about the price, but we do not have such a fear about politics being mingled with it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think Lynn, you want to have a come in?
Yeah, about this rather gloomy approach to gas, I think it's important that I think gas both will and really also should play an important role in the energy systems in Europe also in the future. I do not believe in a silver bullet strategy. To be able to supply Europeans with enough energy and more sustainable energy, but also to an affordable cost, needs a lot of strategies. Energy efficiency, renewables, but also to replace the coal-fired power plants with the cleanest fossil fuels, as the professor pointed towards. It is the fastest and most cost-effective way of reducing CO2 emissions. And if you look at power production from power, the investment costs of building new capacity for producing gas-fired power is very low. Nothing is very low, but it's low compared to all the other sources of power. If you look at the global market for gas, unfortunately for Norway, but good for most European Union member states, the price regime is today low. And we see gas moving towards becoming a global commodity, like oil has been for decades already. With all these new gas fields coming in production in the Asia-Pacific region, with new export capacity from the United States, we have already seen not only lower prices, but more similar prices between the three big markets globally, North America, Europe, and Asia-Pacific region. That is, I think, a trend that is here to stay. And of course, not only is gas the cleanest fossil fuel, it's also good for backing intermittent renewables. And it also could help reduce local emissions significantly, both in heating and also in transport. And allow me to say one other thing. I'm luckily not a member of the foreign service, but the energy civil service in Norway. And let's face it, Europe cannot afford to follow the German example. Very high cost for Germans, and hardly any reductions in CO2 emissions. So there's a huge cost for the German population to hardly any gain in the other end. And basically, it is disrupting the power systems in the neighboring countries as well.
Can I actually ask, I'm going to abuse my privilege of moderator here, but I wanted to ask a follow-up question to both of you, really, and it's about the, with low gas prices, is it much more possible to amend the emissions trading scheme? Because you only need, presumably, a relatively more, slightly increased carbon price, at which then you start pushing coal substantially out of the system and expanding the size of the gas market. I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity with what look like sustained low gas prices to actually do this?
I think the ETS is a European invention. We all know that technically it works perfectly. I went to see to the Leipzig Stock Exchange when you see how everything works well. But of course, with the price between 4 and 5 euros per ton, it definitely doesn't deliver the results, the innovation, pushing out the carbon intensive fuels. So therefore, what we did was we introduced so-called market stability reserve, which means that in a year's time, we're going to remove from the market 800 million permits, and I believe that it will restart the market mechanism to work better. But we believe that after 2021, this new proposal which we made the last year, and which is already respecting the greenhouse gas reduction targets which we all committed to in Paris, means actually it's 43% of the greenhouse gas emission which must be achieved through the ETS. It's quite important goal, and I can tell you when I talk to energy-intensive industry, they're pretty concerned how they are going to manage, what would be the consequences for them. So we believe that this system would work much better than now and will bring much more realistic price, which would comprise the necessary externalities into the price. And on top of it, I would say I also hope that China, as they told us, they would introduce their own emission trading system. I was in Quebec, in Ontario, where they have own cap and trade. Some of the American states, under the name of RGGI, they are doing something similar. South Korea have their own ETS. So I believe that what we should start thinking, and I know that it will not be easy task, how we can link these different ETSs together to try to create what should be the world carbon pricing system, because that would be, I think, the way which would really make this global effort to reduce greenhouse gas emission very, very precise, very material. Very often I'm getting the question why we cannot introduce the floor in the ETS, the price floor, or we cannot do something like Norway did, because Thor was explaining me on the Sleipner when he was showing me, so this is our carbon capture and storage pipe, the green one, which is pushing the CO2 under the seabed. But you have quite high, I think you told me 50 euros per ton carbon tax, and that's the level of technologies which we have today, that you have to have quite big, I would say, carbon tax on top of the ETS to actually deliver the results. So why we cannot do it just across the Europe? Because we believe that the market mechanism in the end would prevail, and because we know that whatever price we would try to introduce, that it would immediately be perceived by definitely quite a few of our member states as a carbon tax, and in that case you need unanimity for that. So we would have endless negotiations on these issues, and therefore what we want to do is actually to use the market mechanism to improve the initial parameters and to get the ETS working and hopefully becoming as an ingredient of future global carbon pricing system.
Right. Yes, sir, yes. Liam?
I think after the Paris Agreement, which in many ways was a success, we are still very far away from a global price on carbon, which is really what we need to efficiently reduce CO2 emissions globally. But yes, low gas prices is an opportunity to actually act on climate change, and of course ETS should be strengthened during this, with the background in this opportunity. It will replace coal for gas, but also coal for renewables, and help bring on energy efficiency in my point of view. And look at what Britain is about to the UK. I didn't like the Brexit more than the Vice President, I think, but let's face it, that's probably going to happen. But Britain has introduced a floor on carbon, and that floor on carbon really brings gas back in the British power market, and they have a plan in 10 years to replace all coal-fired power plants, and they will be able to reach their climate goals. Mainly, they might also end up building a fairly expensive nuclear power plant as well, but they will mainly achieve this target by replacing coal with gas.
Maybe just one more point. What intrigued me to when he referred to the UK. The fact is that we see also how the corporate culture is changing in the financial industry, especially in the banking. If you see that the National Bank of Netherlands is kind of enlarging the mission statement that what they have to care for is not only the sustainability of public finance, but sustainability of the environment, and you simply see that what kind of price tag the international financial institutions are giving to the carbon in the future investment decisions. So that's also the factor which is probably not that known, but there the price for carbon is very often between 50 to 100 euros, and I think it would also determine how the future infrastructure will be built, what actually you would be able to get finance, and that would also have an impact on modernizing and cleaning up of the infrastructure in Europe.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts.
I'm at a loss. We are anticipating that if we're going to have to get to limit the rise in global temperature to just 2 degrees centigrade, then by 2050 we have to see something like a 70 to 75% cut in carbon emissions. And I find it very difficult to believe that we are going to achieve that with the current price that we have for carbon. It's simply far too low. $4 to $5 doesn't handle it. Total, for instance, already has built in something like a 25 euro price. The French have talked about anything from 20 to 50 being necessary. Do you really think we can do it with emissions trading systems? Or do we actually have to have outright carbon taxes? And if so, who imposes them?
That's interesting. Do you want to?
I think I think I'm probably the ambassador is probably already gonna. I think this time I'm not gonna try to give advice.
She put her notes in the back. Don't worry. You know she's not writing. I'm looking at her.
Look at what we did in Norway back in the 1990s. To protests from parliament, from industry, from everywhere, we put in place tax on emitting carbon from oil and gas production offshore. Today, we do see that we run the operations with less use of gas offshore, less use of energy offshore. And we do see, not least, that we have already the two only operational carbon capture and storage facilities in Europe are both on the Norwegian continental shelf, depositing 1.7, 1.8 million tons of carbon dioxide every year. And all this has been possible. We're even powering both most of the gas exports and some of the gas and oil production with renewable hydropower. All this has been made possible because of the carbon tax, which is approximately 50 euros. So I think it's probably not going to be very easy for neither the European Union or many of the member states to impose a tax of 50 euros per ton generally. But I'm sure that it could be an efficient way of reducing CO2 emissions, and maybe it's a good idea to start with some sectors, perhaps.
Well, thank you very much. If no one has any other questions, I shall points to make. I shall move on to the next questions. Is there anybody else in the audience who is burning with a passion to ask a question? Do we have? Come on, there must be somebody in the audience who has got. You've got a fine set of panelists here who can answer all your questions on energy security, Gazprom, nuclear, oil. Are we all very quiet this evening? Yes, this gentleman here. Name and institution, please.
Lubomir Rehaga, I'm Slovak ambassador in London. Recently, first tanker with American shale gas arrived at the UK. Americans opted for self-sustainability by shale gas production. Isn't this way also for Europe's security?
To get American shale? No, more or less, if you allow me to start,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that Professor and both colleagues would complement me in answering the question. The first thing is that if it comes to the LNG, we quickly realized that for that we also need a strategy, because I mean, as Tord has mentioned, we have actually quite big capacities in Europe. I think there are over 200 BCM per year, which is roughly, I think, more than a half, or it's approximately the half what we consume in Europe in the year. But the fact is that they've been not like strategically located. So a lot of them is in Iberian Peninsula. And we see what kind of difference to the price the LNG made in Lithuania, in Svinoujsce, and what kind of new opportunities are opening also for Greece, Italy, in these new gas fields around Cyprus in East Med. And I believe that once we have the LNG in Krk, and I just wanted to assure our Hungarian friend that we are getting all the assurances from Croatians that this floating LNG terminal will start operating in 2 years, and for sure there will be a reverse flow from Croatia to Hungary. That's a condition for this interconnector, and it will be built. So we simply want to demonstrate that we are able to interconnect the LNG terminals much better than before, and that the LNG suppliers could really compete on the European market. And the competition is rather tough. I'm sure that Tord can bring you some concrete numbers. I will just mention one, that in the next couple of years, before the end of the decade, we expect that there will be 50% plus of the LNG on the global market. So that's quite a significant number. That Australia is already becoming #1 exporter. It seems that the United States could become even stronger exporter. So there is already this pipeline versus LNG competition going on. And if it's a solution for Europe, I think you need to have a geology for that. As far as we know, we had some tests in the UK, we had some tests in Poland. I heard that Ukraine have some promising geological preconditions for that. But then you have also to have public support for these policies, and this is definitely not the case in Europe. I think even in the UK, I think in Midlands, where the prospects are quite positive, as I heard, there's clearly strong worry from the local population what this would do to their houses, what will happen with the water table, what will happen with the overall environment. I was in Groningen. It's a big gas field in Netherlands where they have to reduce every year the gas extraction because of the small earthquake you have there, and you have to mobilize the whole population in the region, actually pushing the government and the company in a tough manner to reduce the gas extraction because people are worried about the property, about the future of the region. So the situation is that I honestly think that even with our strong commitment to the highest of environmental standards, simply the combination of the, let's say, good prospects from the geological point of view, public support, which will be very difficult to get, and also our differences in the laws, where in the States, whatever you own it also in the depth below the ground. In Europe, we have a different laws to this as well. So what is below the ground, it's not yours, but it's usually state. So it's a lot of, I would say, different conditions. Therefore, I'm not like super optimistic that we have a shale future in Europe.
Does anyone, Andrea, you have
We made some attempt to explore the unconventional gas, which is gas in place in Hungary is huge, according to the estimation. But after spending some huge amount of money, we have to give up the exploration because due to the different geology, there is no technology today to produce the gas. On the other hand, at that time, our estimation was at least $100 barrel oil equivalent price is needed to be economic, which is not the case. And at this moment, we do not think it would be a rational opportunity, at least in Central Eastern Europe.
No, I think, of course, this is something that has to be decided on a national level, I guess. But I think while producing oil from a conventional land onshore oil field is not necessarily a very big industrial operation, producing shale oil and shale gas is a huge operation requiring huge amounts of water, sand, chemicals. And I think probably the Vice President has a good point when observing the fact that it could create quite a lot of resistance in the population, especially if the resources are in densely populated areas, which we know that some of the probably huge shale gas resources that are in place in Europe, some of them are in densely populated parts of Western Europe, and it's probably not going to be very easily kind of produced.
Well, it's supposedly that there's a huge shale oil basin under the Ile de Paris, under Notre Dame. And I suspect somehow that will never be produced. But John, you wanted to make a point.
The first point I'm going to make is a very simple one from Mr. Šefčovič. The difference between what should be done and what will be done. We should be developing gas. We should have a gas-based future. I'm positing the possibility that we may not actually get one. And this particularly applies with shale. Why does it apply with shale? After all, we in Europe face a paradox. We have better environmental legislation, and we actually apply it more rigidly than in the United States. So therefore, we should be able to do something complicated in a better form, having learnt some of the lessons of the US. But we won't, for one simple reason. If you want to develop shale in the US, you only need the approval of one landowner who has the absolute rights underneath. Anywhere in Europe, you have to get government approval because they have the land, they have the rights to the mineral. But then you have to get something that is not formal, it's informal. It's community approval. We have not got any method for rewarding the community and gaining community approval because we don't know how to define the community. We don't know how much one would have to put in hard cash terms to make them feel that they were directly benefiting from what is, put bluntly in energy terms, a very messy business. So the fact that we have a potential resource that would do enormous good in terms of both energy supply and energy security, I think will go by default. And there's even a further irony. If there is a major success story in Europe, it's likely to come in the UK. And it's going to come in a UK that by that time is likely to be out of Europe. So how much will the EU be willing to learn from an ex-member not bound anymore by EU environmental standards? It's a nightmare.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I say, John is taking the role of Mr. Gloom and Doom this afternoon. So I think really I've got a little note here saying, in green ink, saying, time is up. So sadly, I think we could probably go on for several hours. But in order to save you your coffee break and the cocktail later on, we will cease and desist now. Refreshments are available outside in the lobby, but please be reminded, you have to be back in your seats in half an hour at 17:45 for today's final session on the financial framework post-2020. Thank you very much, and can we please thank the panel? Thanks, great. Thank you.